In today's video, we're talking about my 5 favorite whiskey cocktails. Of course, there's nothing wrong with just drinking some straight whiskey or maybe on the rocks, but sometimes I'm in the mood for something a little fancier, a little more interesting, something fun to make with friends. So I've ranked my 5 favorite mixed whiskey drinks, and today we're making them all. And by the way, I am by no means an experienced bartender or mixologist. I'm just a whiskey enthusiast who's accumulated a few bottles and some miscellaneous various bar tools. Anyway, enough of the introduction. Let's get into it and make my 5 favorite whiskey cocktails. The first drink on our list is probably the most complicated to make, and it's also my favorite. It's also the drink that I'm bound to get the most criticism over. And that's because I've put my own spin on a very classic whiskey cocktail, and that's the Old Fashioned. I've been making Old Fashions for a long time, and over the years I've tweaked and modified it a bit, and where I've ended up is my personal favorite preparation of it, even if it is, in a purist's mind, pretty bastardized. But whatever, I've never let other people's snobbery keep me from doing what I want to do, so we're making this thing. For this old-fashioned recipe, we need some bourbon, some Angostura bitters, an orange, and some maraschino cherries. That's right, this is a cherry old-fashioned. And I'll mention there is a time and a place for the fancy maraschino cherries, like Luxardo cherries, and we will be using these later on. But for my cherry old-fashioned, I personally like it best using regular old cheap maraschino cherries, like the kind you'd put on an ice cream sundae. And I almost forgot one of the ingredients, and that's a raw sugar cube. To start, we just drop that sugar cube into a rocks glass. Next, we get our Angostura bitters, and you do want to use the real deal Angostura bitters for an old-fashioned. Traditionally, this drink calls for splashing 4 dashes of the bitters onto the sugar cube, but I like to go a couple extra and do 6 dashes. Next is the part that I'm sure I'll take the most heat for, and that's adding one of those maraschino cherries right in there with the sugar cube and the bitters, and muddling it all together right there in the glass. But just keep an open mind, and you will not be upset at what I'm doing here if you make this for yourself and give it a taste. Now for our bourbon. For my old-fashioned today, I'm using Buffalo Trace. You can use any bourbon you want, but I just got this bottle recently, and I've been looking for an excuse to open it up, and it's going to be delicious in this cocktail. So now I'll measure out 2 ounces of that bourbon, and again, because I'm not a seasoned and especially practiced bartender, it's almost a certainty that I'm going to spill some of this. Well, it could have been a lot worse than that, so I'll take it. Now for the other step that I think some of the real old-fashioned traditionalists are going to hate me for, and that's adding a half an ounce of that red maraschino cherry liquid. Now we add the ice, about what I'll call a handful and a half. Yes, a very official measurement. Now just give it a stir. And while a traditional old-fashioned calls for an orange peel twist, this is a cherry old-fashioned, so we don't need a lot of that orange flavor. But it still makes for a nice garnish, so what I like to do is take one thin half slice of orange and stick it right in there. And that's it. Delicious, sweet, refreshing, cherry old-fashioned. Just trust me on this one. I've never made this drink for someone who didn't tell me that they found it delicious, whiskey drinker or not. Next on our list is a classic Manhattan. A Manhattan could be looked at as whiskey's answer to a martini, but far more delicious in my opinion. A Manhattan calls for rye, unlike the old-fashioned, which almost always calls for bourbon. For this drink, we need to start with a mixing glass. And into that mixing glass, we're gonna add 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. Now, every Manhattan aficionado has their own favorite brand of vermouth to use, but it really doesn't matter as long as you use sweet vermouth. Then we'll add 2 ounces of rye. And today, I'm using Wild Turkey rye because, well, it's the only bottle of rye I have right now. But there's nothing wrong with some good old Wild Turkey. Next, we're bringing back those Angostura bitters, and I'm going to add 4 dashes. Now a couple big handfuls of ice, and we stir. Traditionally, a Manhattan is never shaken, only stirred. And this is why we had to start in a mixing glass, because the next step is to strain that liquid out of the ice. I'm using one of my short stemless martini glasses, but of course any sort of martini glass or a proper Manhattan glass, which is nearly the same thing as a martini glass, would work. And now is when we bring back those Luxardo maraschino cherries, because we're garnishing this drink with 2 of them served on a cocktail pick. And that's it, the classic rye Manhattan. Definitely the booziest of the 5 drinks I'm making today. Bold but not overpowering. That rye is definitely the star of the show. And those delicious Luxardo cherries are, well, the cherry on top. Our next 2 whiskey drinks on the list could not be simpler. In fact, each of them has only 2 ingredients, not including the ice. First up is the Highball. I'll start by filling a tall glass most of the way with ice cubes. And then I'm adding 2 ounces of, well, whatever you like. Bourbon, scotch, whiskey. For me, I think this is a perfect drink for my Detroit City Distillery Butcher's Cut Bourbon, because it's quite strong tasting and pretty high proof. And since I'm diluting it quite a bit with the second ingredient, it balances out quite nicely. So in goes 2 ounces of the Butcher's Cut Bourbon, and then I'm just filling the glass up most of the rest of the way with ginger ale, whatever kind you like. Verner's is good. I happen to be pretty partial to Canada Dry, which is what I have here. Give it a gentle stir, and that's it. Crisp, refreshing, perfect for a hot summer's day or night sitting around a bonfire. Really all we did here is make a Jack and Coke, but with stronger whiskey and ginger ale instead of Coke. Next up is the Godfather, another super simple drink. Only 2 ingredients, well, plus the ice. And I'm starting with a rocks glass. Now, we can just use a handful of ice cubes, but for this drink, I happen to enjoy using one great big spherical ice ball. And if you want to make some of these yourself, you just need one of these silicone ice ball molds. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to check it out. Now, a classic Godfather calls for scotch, so to this glass I'm adding 2 ounces of some Johnny Walker Black, followed up by some amaretto, or in the case of this Di Serono's, amaretto flavored liqueur that's not technically amaretto but tastes delicious anyway. A classic preparation calls for 1 ounce of the amaretto, but I like to go a little heavier and do 1.5 ounces. Makes it a little sweeter, a little more luxurious. Give it a light stir, and lastly, we garnish with some orange peel. A little twist to release some of those orange oils, and in it goes. And that's the Godfather. Boozy and sweet and warm in all the right ways. A perfect wintertime drink in my opinion. Though it's springtime right now, so don't let that stop you from trying this out today. Last up on our list is another definite wintertime drink. I'm talking about the Hot Toddy. Now, I admittedly only tend to go for a hot toddy when I've got a cold or a sore throat, or just plain need to warm up my freezing bones. Viewed as a sort of home remedy, going all the way back to the 1600s, the hot toddy is served, well, hot, in a mug. The toddy as we know it today has hints of lemon, cinnamon, honey, lots of warm and soothing flavors. Now, before we really start putting this drink together, there's 2 things we have to do first. First, make some tea. So into a measuring cup, I'll pour 1 cup of very hot water and add 1 bag of good quality black tea, and I'll let that steep. And in the meantime, because I want my mug to be nice and hot when I actually make this drink, I'll fill it up as well with hot water just until my tea is ready. Okay, the tea is just about done steeping, so I've emptied the hot water from my mug, and now I'll go in with 1 tablespoon of honey, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, freshly squeezed preferably, and now for the whiskey. A hot toddy is often made with a good blended whiskey, so this seemed like a perfect use for my Bushmills Original Irish Whiskey. So to the mug, I'll add 1.5 ounces. Now I'll just pour in that cup of brewed tea. And finally, we garnish with a single cinnamon stick and a half of a lemon slice. The ultimate cold weather whiskey drink that'll cure what ails you. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this whiskey cocktail video. I know it's a little bit different than the kind of videos I usually make. And if you're already a whiskey or cocktail aficionado, I haven't shown or told you anything you didn't already know, except maybe for my cherry old fashioned. But if you're just getting into whiskey, or maybe you're just whiskey curious and you're looking for some tasty ideas, give one or all of these drinks a try. And I'll put a link in the video description to the recipes for all the drinks we made here, in case you want to check them out later, reference them, print them out, whatever. I'll also put some links to a few of the bartending tools and gadgets that I used here today, in case you want to check those out. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future, maybe whiskey videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.